6 men from the Alamo Scouts conducted reconnaissance that enabled the rescue of 513 American prisoners of war from Cabanatuan camp 30 miles behind Japanese lines without losing a single POW during the operation. The Scouts spent 3 days observing the camp, counting guards, mapping positions, identifying escape routes, providing intelligence that let Rangers plan an assault so precise that they freed over 500 emaciated prisoners while killing or routing every Japanese guard without POW casualties from the raid itself. This represented the culmination of the Alamo Scouts' mission profile, emphasizing reconnaissance and intelligence gathering over direct combat, demonstrating how elite small units operating behind enemy lines could enable larger operations impossible without the precise information these specialists provided through stealth and patience rather than firepower. The Scouts conducted 106 missions during the war without losing a single scout to enemy action, a perfect combat record achieved through training, discipline, and operational philosophy that valued intelligence over engagement, making them the most successful special operations unit of the Pacific War measured by mission success rate and casualty avoidance. The Alamo Scouts emerged from 6th Army Commander General Walter Krueger's recognition that Pacific Island campaigns required specialized reconnaissance capabilities that conventional infantry units couldn't provide. Island warfare demanded precise intelligence about Japanese positions, strengths, and defenses before amphibious assaults committed forces to beaches where Japanese waited in fortified positions. Conventional reconnaissance provided general information about enemy presence but lacked the detailed tactical intelligence that assault planners needed to minimize casualties while maximizing surprise. Krueger wanted small teams that could operate behind enemy lines for extended periods, gathering specific information about defenses without being detected, then extracting to provide intelligence enabling informed operational decisions rather than attacking blindly and accepting whatever casualties resulted from encountering unpredicted defenses. The selection process for Alamo Scouts was rigorous because the missions required physical fitness, navigation skills, survival expertise, and psychological resilience that most soldiers didn't possess. Candidates had to demonstrate ability to operate independently without constant supervision, make decisions under pressure when no support was available, maintain discipline during long periods observing targets without taking action that might compromise missions. The training camp in New Guinea put volunteers through weeks of intensive instruction in jungle navigation, survival techniques, silent movement, observation and reporting, small unit tactics emphasizing avoidance over engagement. Most candidates failed to complete training because the physical demands and psychological stress of operating alone behind enemy lines without support proved too much for soldiers accustomed to operating within larger units that provided security and support. The operational philosophy distinguished Alamo Scouts from other special operations units that emphasized combat over intelligence gathering. Scouts were trained to avoid combat whenever possible because firefights attracted attention that compromised reconnaissance missions, requiring stealth and patience over aggressive action. Their mission was gathering intelligence and returning with that information intact, Rather than killing enemies or destroying targets that other units could handle, scouts provided the intelligence enabling effective attacks. This restraint required discipline because soldiers trained for combat naturally wanted to engage enemies they encountered. Yet scout training emphasized that successful missions meant completing reconnaissance without being detected rather than measuring success through enemies killed or objectives destroyed. The perfect combat record of 0 scouts lost to enemy action validated this philosophy by demonstrating that intelligence missions succeeded through stealth, while combat created casualties that reduced unit effectiveness. The mission profile typically involved inserting small teams of 4 to 8 scouts behind Japanese lines through submarine, small boat, or overland infiltration depending on terrain and Japanese presence. Once inserted, scouts would move to observation positions near targets, establishing concealed positions where they could watch Japanese activities for days or weeks without being detected. They'd count forces, map positions, identify weaknesses, observe routines, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities that assault planners could exploit. Communication with headquarters occurred through scheduled radio contacts when possible, though many missions operated without reliable communication, requiring scouts to gather intelligence, then extract to deliver reports in person. This independent operation required trusting scouts to make correct decisions without guidance, knowing their intelligence would shape operations involving thousands of troops whose lives depended on scout reports being accurate and complete. The training emphasized survival skills because missions behind enemy lines meant scouts couldn't rely on supply lines or support if situations deteriorated. They learned to live off the land, purify water, treat injuries, navigate without maps when necessary, all while maintaining operational effectiveness despite privations that would incapacitate troops dependent on regular supply and support. The psychological training addressed isolation and stress of operating alone in enemy territory, where discovery meant death or capture, requiring mental toughness that let scouts function effectively despite constant danger and lack of support that ordinary soldiers took for granted. This combination of physical conditioning, technical skills, and psychological resilience created operators capable of missions that seemed impossible to forces lacking comparable training and operational philosophy. The intelligence that American POWs were being held at Cabanatuan camp created urgency because Japan was losing the Philippines and might massacre prisoners rather than allow their liberation. Military leadership understood that as American forces advanced, Japanese might eliminate POWs to prevent them from being freed, creating moral imperative to rescue prisoners before Japanese decided their continued existence was liability. The problem was Cabanatuan sat 30 miles behind Japanese lines with unknown number of guards protecting over 500 prisoners too weak from years of captivity to march or fight their way out, even if guards were neutralized. Any rescue attempt required precise intelligence about guard strength, positions, routines, and escape routes that could accommodate evacuating hundreds of emaciated men who'd been starving and sick for 3 years in Japanese captivity. The Alamo Scouts received the reconnaissance mission because their reputation for operating behind enemy lines without detection made them ideal for gathering intelligence needed to plan a rescue that military leadership considered nearly impossible. 6 scouts infiltrated behind Japanese lines, moved to positions near Cabanatuan camp, established observation posts where they could watch the camp for 3 days without being detected by Japanese guards or local civilians who might report their presence. They counted guards during different shifts, mapped guard positions and patrol patterns, identified weak points in perimeter defenses, observed routines that revealed when guards were most alert and when discipline relaxed. This detailed intelligence gathering provided Rangers with information enabling them to plan assault timing and approach routes that would maximize surprise while minimizing risk to prisoners who couldn't protect themselves if fighting developed inside the camp. The intelligence picture that emerged showed approximately 250 Japanese guards at the camp, with additional enemy forces in nearby villages that could reinforce the garrison if alarms were raised. The scouts identified guard tower positions, located machine gun emplantments, observed patrol schedules, and noted that guards were most relaxed during evening meal periods when discipline decreased. They mapped approach routes that would bring assault forces to the camp perimeter without being observed, identified escape routes that could accommodate evacuating over 500 men, including many who couldn't walk without assistance. This intelligence let Rangers plan assault that would neutralize guards quickly before they could harm prisoners, while Filipino guerrilla forces blocked reinforcement routes, preventing Japanese from nearby positions from interfering with rescue operations. The raid planning based on scout intelligence involved coordinating Rangers, Filipino guerrillas, and Alamo Scouts to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. Rangers would assault the camp at dusk when guard alertness was lowest, using routes the scouts had identified as providing concealment until final approach. Filipino guerrillas would establish blocking positions on roads leading to the camp, preventing Japanese reinforcements from interfering with the rescue while providing security for evacuation routes. Alamo Scouts would guide Rangers to assault positions, then provide security during evacuation, using their knowledge of terrain and Japanese positions to prevent surprises that might endanger prisoners during extraction. This coordination required trust between different units that hadn't worked together before, unified by scout intelligence that let each element understand how their actions fit into overall plan. The assault execution demonstrated how precise intelligence enabled operations that seemed impossible when planners lacked information about enemy positions and capabilities. Rangers approached the camp using routes scouts had mapped, arriving at perimeter without being detected because they knew exactly where guards were positioned and when patrols would be elsewhere. The assault began precisely at dusk when guards were eating and alertness was lowest, achieving complete surprise that let Rangers overrun guard positions before Japanese could organize effective resistance. The coordination between different Ranger elements attacking simultaneously from multiple directions prevented guards from concentrating defensive fire, while blocking forces on roads kept reinforcements from reaching the camp during the critical period when prisoners were being evacuated. The evacuation was the most vulnerable phase because over 500 emaciated men had to be moved 30 miles through Japanese territory to American lines, requiring transportation for those too weak to walk and protection against Japanese attempts to intercept the column. The scouts' intelligence about escape routes and Japanese positions enabled planners to prepare ox carts and stretchers for prisoners who couldn't walk, while Filipino civilians provided additional transportation and guides who knew the terrain. The evacuation moved along routes the scouts had identified as avoiding Japanese concentrations, with blocking forces preventing enemy interference until the column reached American lines, where proper medical care could begin treating men who'd survived 3 years of starvation and disease in Japanese captivity. The 0 POW casualties during the raid itself represented extraordinary achievement given the risks inherent in assaulting fortified positions while protecting hundreds of helpless prisoners. The precision enabled by scout intelligence meant Rangers knew exactly where every guard was positioned, could plan assault that neutralized those positions before guards could harm prisoners, executed the plan so effectively that Japanese never had opportunity to threaten POWs even as they were being killed or routed by attacking Rangers. This validation of intelligence-driven operations showed that special operations units providing precise reconnaissance could enable larger forces to achieve objectives that seemed impossible when lacking detailed intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities. The Scouts' 3 days of patient observation had provided information enabling Rangers to execute assault that freed over 500 prisoners without POW casualties despite operating 30 miles behind enemy lines. The broader Alamo Scout operational record of 106 missions without losing a scout to enemy action demonstrated consistent success that validated their training and operational philosophy. Other special operations units suffered casualties from combat engagements that were part of their mission profiles, but Scouts' emphasis on reconnaissance over combat meant they avoided the firefights that killed operators from units with different missions. This didn't mean Scouts were less capable in combat than other elite units, but that their mission design emphasized intelligence gathering that required stealth and patience rather than aggressive action that attracted attention and created casualties. The perfect record showed that properly designed reconnaissance missions could achieve strategic impact through enabling larger operations while maintaining operator safety through avoiding unnecessary combat that other missions required. The post-war recognition of Alamo Scouts was minimal compared to their achievements because their operations remained classified, while their operational philosophy of avoiding combat meant they lacked the dramatic combat stories that generated public recognition. Special operations units that engaged in firefights and destroyed targets received medals and publicity celebrating their aggressive actions, while scouts who'd completed 106 missions gathering intelligence without being detected received little recognition because their success was measured through operations they enabled rather than enemies they'd killed. This reflected broader pattern where intelligence operations receive less recognition than combat actions, despite often being more important to strategic outcomes, creating situation where the most successful unit, measured by mission completion rate and casualty avoidance, became one of the least recognized, despite enabling operations that saved thousands of Allied lives. The influence on modern special operations doctrine was profound, as military planners studied Alamo Scout methods and incorporated their lessons into post-war special operations training and mission design. The emphasis on intelligence gathering over combat became fundamental to precise reconnaissance missions that modern special forces conduct, when precise information about enemy positions and capabilities is needed before conventional forces commit to operations. The training methods emphasizing physical fitness, survival skills, and psychological resilience became standard for special operations selection and training that continues today in units like Army Rangers and Special Forces, who trace lineage to World War II special operations pioneers.
The operational philosophy, valuing mission success over body counts, influenced how modern special operations measure effectiveness through objectives achieved rather than enemies killed, recognizing that intelligence missions succeed through stealth, while combat creates casualties that reduce unit effectiveness over time. The Cabanatuan raid became case study in special operations planning, showing how precise intelligence enables operations that seem impossible when planners lack information about enemy positions and capabilities. Military schools studying the raid emphasized how scout reconnaissance had identified every critical piece of information that assault planners needed to design an operation that freed over 500 prisoners while avoiding casualties that conventional wisdom suggested were inevitable. The lessons influenced special operations planning, emphasizing importance of reconnaissance before committing forces to operations where success depends on achieving surprise and avoiding enemy strengths that detailed intelligence can identify and help avoid. This validation of intelligence-driven operations shaped modern special operations doctrine, requiring thorough reconnaissance before conducting direct action missions, where lack of information about enemy positions could lead to casualties from unpredicted defenses.
The selection and training methods that produced Alamo Scouts influenced modern special operations qualification courses that test candidates' physical fitness, technical skills, and psychological resilience under conditions simulating operational stress. The Alamo Scout training camp's emphasis on independent operation without supervision or support became model for modern special operations training that forces candidates to solve problems and make decisions without guidance, recognizing that missions behind enemy lines require operators who can function effectively when no support is available and mistakes could be fatal. The high attrition rates in scout training that saw most candidates fail to complete the course became accepted standard for special operations selection, recognizing that only small percentage of soldiers possess the combination of physical capability and psychological characteristics needed for these missions. The prisoner rescue mission profile that Cabanatuan exemplified influenced subsequent special operations, including modern hostage rescue units that trace conceptual lineage to the Scouts' reconnaissance, enabling Rangers to free POWs. The understanding that rescuing prisoners or hostages requires precise intelligence about guard positions, routines, and escape routes before assault forces can plan operations with reasonable chance of success without casualties came directly from Cabanatuan experience, showing how scout reconnaissance had enabled assault that seemed impossible without that intelligence. Modern hostage rescue planning emphasizes reconnaissance and intelligence gathering to same degree that characterized Cabanatuan preparations, recognizing that attempting rescues without understanding enemy positions and capabilities risks casualties among those being rescued through encountering unpredicted defenses or guards having opportunity to harm hostages before being neutralized. The Filipino collaboration during Cabanatuan raid demonstrated importance of indigenous support for special operations behind enemy lines where local knowledge and support can provide advantages that foreign operators lack. The Filipino guerrillas who'd provided blocking forces preventing Japanese reinforcement and civilians who'd assisted evacuation had local knowledge enabling them to guide American forces through terrain they didn't know, while avoiding Japanese positions that might have interfered with rescue operations.
This pattern of special operations working with indigenous forces to achieve objectives that neither could accomplish independently became model for modern special operations doctrine, emphasizing building relationships with local populations who can provide intelligence, support, and capabilities that foreign operators lack regardless of their training and equipment.
The psychological impact on rescued POWs of seeing American soldiers appear to liberate them after 3 years of captivity created powerful testimony to the importance of never abandoning prisoners who endured suffering, knowing their government might rescue them eventually. The prisoners who'd survived starvation, disease, and brutality through belief that liberation might come received validation of that faith when rangers and scouts appeared to free them, creating emotional release that survivors described as overwhelming after years of wondering whether anyone knew they were alive or cared enough to attempt rescue. This demonstrated beyond tactical success that rescue operations have moral dimension, validating commitment to never leave fellow soldiers in enemy hands, regardless of risks and difficulties involved in attempting rescues behind enemy lines. The operational security surrounding Alamo Scout missions meant their achievements remained classified for decades after the war, preventing public recognition of their contributions until historical researchers gained access to classified records documenting their missions. The scouts who'd completed 106 missions without losing a scout returned to civilian life without being able to discuss their service because operations remained classified to protect intelligence sources and operational methods that might be reused in future conflicts. This created situation where the most successful Special Operations Unit, measured by mission completion rate and casualty avoidance, received minimal recognition, while their accomplishments remained unknown to the public that might have celebrated their achievements if information had been available during the post-war period when military heroism was widely celebrated. If stories like the Alamo Scouts matter to you, if understanding how elite units achieve perfect mission records matters, if recognizing soldiers who saved hundreds of lives through stealth and intelligence matters, subscribe to the Foxhole Chronicles. We tell forgotten stories every week about special operations units that operated in shadows rather than seeking glory, about missions that succeeded through precision and intelligence rather than firepower, about soldiers whose achievements remained classified while they deserved recognition. The Alamo Scouts story is one among many more coming, and we're here to give them the recognition history denied them. Subscribe and stay with us through all the forgotten stories about courage and achievement in service of missions larger than personal recognition. This is the Alamo Scouts who conducted 106 missions behind Japanese lines without losing a single scout to enemy action, demonstrating how elite reconnaissance units operating with discipline and restraint can achieve perfect operational records through intelligence gathering that enables larger operations. This is 6 scouts who spent 3 days observing Cabanatuan POW camp, mapping guard positions and identifying weaknesses that enabled rangers to plan rescue, freeing 513 American prisoners without losing a single POW during the assault. This is operational philosophy emphasizing stealth and patience over aggressive action,
recognizing that reconnaissance missions succeed through gathering intelligence without being detected, rather than measuring success through enemies killed or targets destroyed. This is validation that special operations achieve strategic impact through enabling conventional forces rather than just conducting independent actions, showing how small elite units providing precise intelligence multiply effectiveness of larger forces through information that conventional reconnaissance couldn't provide.
The legacy lives in modern special operations forces that learned from Alamo Scout methods and incorporated their lessons into contemporary training and operations. The emphasis on intelligence gathering over combat became fundamental to special reconnaissance missions, providing precise information before conventional forces commit to operations where success depends on achieving surprise and avoiding enemy strengths. The training methods producing physically fit, technically skilled operators with psychological resilience to function independently behind enemy lines became standard for special operations selection, recognizing that only small percentage of soldiers possess characteristics needed for these missions. The operational philosophy, valuing mission success over body counts, influenced how modern special operations measure effectiveness through objectives achieved rather than enemies killed, recognizing that intelligence missions succeed through stealth, while combat creates casualties, reducing unit effectiveness. The Cabanatuan raid became defining example of how precise intelligence enables operations that seem impossible without information about enemy positions and capabilities. The scout reconnaissance identifying guard strengths, positions, routines, and escape routes provided rangers with intelligence enabling assault plan that freed over 500 prisoners while avoiding casualties that conventional wisdom suggested were inevitable when operating 30 miles behind enemy lines. This validated intelligence-driven operations, showing that special operations units providing detailed reconnaissance can enable larger forces to achieve objectives impossible without that intelligence, creating strategic impact through information gathering that multiplies conventional force effectiveness beyond what those forces could achieve attacking blindly without understanding enemy positions and capabilities. This is the final truth about the Alamo Scouts, who achieved perfect operational record through 106 missions gathering intelligence behind enemy lines without losing a single scout to enemy action. Their success came from training emphasizing physical fitness, survival skills, and psychological resilience, combined with operational philosophy valuing stealth and patience over aggressive engagement that attracted attention compromising reconnaissance missions. The Cabanatuan raid, where 6 scouts provided intelligence enabling rescue of 513 POWs, demonstrated how elite reconnaissance units operating with discipline can enable larger operations, achieving objectives that seem impossible without precise information about enemy positions and capabilities. The 0 POW casualties during the raid validated intelligence-driven operations, showing that detailed reconnaissance enables assault planning that neutralizes enemy positions before they can threaten those being rescued. The legacy continues in modern special operations forces incorporating Alamo Scout methods into training and operations, emphasizing intelligence gathering, indigenous collaboration, and measured use of force rather than assuming all special operations require aggressive combat. The lessons learned from scout operations influenced special reconnaissance doctrine,
hostage rescue planning, and selection training, creating operators capable of independent operation behind enemy lines without support. The recognition that finally came when Scout operations were declassified validated their achievements, showing they were the most successful Special Operations Unit measured by mission completion rate and casualty avoidance, though their success was measured through operations they enabled rather than enemies they killed. This shows that military effectiveness should be measured through objectives achieved rather than just body counts, recognizing that intelligence operations achieve strategic impact through enabling larger forces rather than just conducting independent actions, validating operational philosophy that emphasized stealth and reconnaissance over combat, creating perfect record of 106 missions without losing a scout to enemy action.